Aurora Santini had worked for Raphael Leone for almost 3 years, and in that time she had learned exactly one rule about him. He never let anyone see anything soft. Not weakness, not doubt, not warmth. He walked through his own mansion the way he walked into a boardroom, spine straight, face unreadable, voice low and controlled. Men twice his size lowered their eyes when he passed them in the hallway. Aurora had seen grown men's hands shake when he simply looked their way. That was the man she worked for. That was the man she had, against every warning in her own head, fallen quietly in love with. She had never told anyone. She had barely admitted it to herself. It felt foolish, even dangerous, to want something from a man like Raphael Leone. He was her boss. He signed her paychecks. He trusted her with his calendar, his contracts, his coffee order, and nothing more personal than that. She told herself most nights that this was enough. That watching him from a safe distance was safer than wanting to be closer. That Tuesday afternoon she had a folder of papers that needed his signature before the end of the day. His assistant at the front desk told her he had gone to the private wing of the house, the part of the mansion Aurora almost never entered. She hesitated at the tall wooden door, then pushed it open slowly, expecting an empty hallway. Instead she heard laughter. Not his usual dry, controlled chuckle. Real laughter. Bright and unguarded. Aurora froze in the doorway, the folder pressed against her chest. Through the gap in the door she saw him. Raphael Leone was sitting on the floor of a sunlit room, his jacket thrown carelessly over the back of a chair, his sleeves rolled up past his forearms. In front of him sat a small girl, no older than 5, with dark curly hair and a bright yellow dress. She was stacking wooden blocks into a tower, and every time it wobbled, Raphael reached out one hand to steady it, patient in a way Aurora had never once seen him be with an adult. The tower fell anyway. Blocks scattered across the floor. The little girl gasped, then burst into giggles, and Raphael laughed with her, a real warm sound that Aurora felt somewhere deep in her chest. Again? The girl asked, already gathering the blocks back into her small hands. Again, he said, and his voice was nothing like the voice Aurora heard in meetings. It was soft. Unarmored. The girl crawled into his lap without asking permission, the way only a small child could, and wrapped her arms around his neck. Raphael held her like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he had done it 1,000 times before. I missed you today, the girl said into his shoulder. I missed you more, he answered. Then she pulled back, looked up at him with wide brown eyes, and said the words that stopped Aurora's heart completely. Can we stay like this forever, Daddy? Aurora's hand tightened around the folder until the edges of the paper bent under her fingers. Daddy. The word rang in her ears, louder than anything else in the room. She had worked beside this man for 3 years. She had organized his schedule down to the last minute. She had never once heard a single mention of a wife, a child, a family hidden somewhere in the private corners of his life. And yet here he was, cross-legged on the floor of a sunlit room, holding a little girl who called him Daddy as if the word belonged to her completely. Raphael pressed a kiss to the top of the girl's head. Forever is a long time, Celeste, he said gently. But I promise you, I am not going anywhere. Celeste smiled, satisfied with that answer, and went back to stacking her blocks. Aurora stepped back from the door as quietly as she could. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure someone would hear it. She turned and walked back down the long hallway, her shoes silent against the marble floor, her mind spinning faster than she could control. A daughter. He had a daughter. She thought of every quiet moment between them over the last 3 years. The way he sometimes looked at her a second too long before looking away. The way he remembered small details about her life that she never remembered telling him. She had convinced herself in her weakest moments that maybe there was something there. Something unspoken. But he had a whole life she knew nothing about. A little girl who called him Daddy. A family hidden away from the world, protected behind these private walls. Aurora reached the top of the staircase and stopped, pressing her hand against the cool railing to steady herself. She thought about the single mothers she had grown up around. Her own mother, exhausted every single night from raising 3 children alone after their father left. She had promised herself long ago that she would never build a life around someone else's ready-made family, no matter how much her heart wanted to. And Raphael Leone, feared by everyone who knew his name, was clearly a father first. She swallowed hard, straightened her blazer, and walked back toward the office to leave the folder with his assistant instead. She would find another time to get his signature. Right now, she needed a moment to breathe, to rebuild the careful walls she had spent 3 years constructing around her own heart. She did not yet know that everything she believed in that hallway was wrong. She did not know about a woman named Ilaria, or a night that had ended in tragedy, or a promise made to a dying mother that had changed the course of two lives forever. All she knew, walking away from that sunlit room, was that the man she loved already had a daughter. And she had no idea, not yet, how far that single word would carry her. Aurora did not sleep well that night. She lay awake staring at her ceiling, replaying the sound of that small voice again and again. Daddy. It was such a simple word, and yet it had rearranged everything she thought she understood about the man she worked for. By the time she arrived at the office the next morning, she had already decided how she was going to handle it. She would be professional. She would be efficient. She would not ask questions that were none of her business, and she would certainly not let herself feel anything more than she already did, which was already too much. Raphael noticed the change immediately. He was used to Aurora walking into his office with a certain ease, setting his coffee down exactly where he liked it, teasing him gently about his impossible schedule, meeting his eyes without flinching the way almost no one else in his life dared to do. That morning, she placed his coffee down without a word, kept her eyes on the folder in her hands, and left before he could say more than good morning. He told himself it was nothing. Perhaps she was tired. Perhaps something at home was bothering her. But the distance did not disappear the next day or the day after that. Aurora began finding reasons to send documents through his assistant instead of bringing them herself. She stopped lingering in his doorway the way she used to, the small moments where they would talk about nothing important for a few extra minutes before she returned to her desk. When he asked her a direct question, she answered quickly and left the room just as quickly, as if staying too long might cost her something. Raphael Leon was not a man who missed details. It was the reason he had survived in a world that had buried men far more careful than him. He noticed when a supplier was a day late on a shipment. He noticed when one of his men hesitated half a second too long before answering a question. And he noticed, with a discomfort he did not want to examine too closely, that Aurora Santini had built a wall between them almost overnight. He did not know what he had done. He turned the question over for days, searching for something he might have said or failed to say. He came up with nothing. Whatever had changed in her had happened somewhere outside his sight, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. In the private wing of the mansion, life continued the way it always did. Celeste ran through the halls with Agata, the elderly woman who had cared for her since she was small, chasing after her with warnings about scraped knees and messy hands. In the evenings, when his work allowed it, Raphael sat with Celeste while she ate her dinner, listening to her talk about her day with the kind of full attention he gave almost no one else. Nobody in his organization knew about Celeste. Not the men who worked under him, not the rivals who watched his every move looking for a weakness to exploit. He had built an invisible wall around her existence, keeping her far from the world he lived in, and he intended to keep it that way for as long as he possibly could. Cosimo, his oldest friend and the only man who truly understood the shape of his life, was the only one who came close to the truth. He had been there on the worst night of it all, though even he did not know everything. "You look distracted," Cosimo said one evening, watching Raphael stare at a contract without reading a single line of it. "I'm fine," Raphael said. "You've read that same page 4 times. Raphael set the papers down. "Aurora's been distant this week." Cosimo raised an eyebrow, careful to keep his voice light. "Distant how?" "She won't look at me. She barely speaks unless she has to." "Did you do something?" "I don't know," Raphael admitted, and the honesty in his own voice surprised him. He was not a man who admitted uncertainty easily. "I don't know what I did." Cosimo studied him for a long moment. He had worked beside Raphael long enough to recognize the particular frustration in his friend's voice, the same frustration a man felt when something mattered to him more than he wanted it to. "Maybe it isn't about you," Cosimo said carefully. "Maybe something happened in her own life." Raphael considered that, but it didn't sit right with him. Aurora had always been the kind of person who spoke plainly when something was bothering her. She did not disappear into silence. She confronted things directly, which was one of the reasons he trusted her more than almost anyone else in his life. He did not know that she had walked past the private wing that Tuesday afternoon. He did not know she had seen Celeste climb into his lap, or heard the word that had changed everything for her. He simply knew that something had shifted, and he did not like the empty space it had left behind. Meanwhile, Aurora spent her nights convincing herself that distance was the right choice. She reminded herself over and over of every reason a relationship with him would never work. He had a daughter to protect. He had a life built around secrecy and danger that she barely understood. She had grown up watching her own mother struggle alone, and she had promised herself long ago that she would never walk willingly into a situation that complicated. And yet, even as she repeated all of this to herself, she found she could not stop thinking about the way he had looked holding that little girl. Soft, gentle. Nothing like the man everyone else in his world was afraid of. She told herself it did not matter. He already had a family. Whatever she had imagined between them had only ever existed in her own hopeful mind. She did not yet know how wrong she was about all of it. 5 years earlier, before Celeste ever learned to walk, there was a man named Emilio Bianchi who believed he had finally escaped the life that had raised him. Emilio had grown up on the edges of a world he never chose, the son of a man who worked errands for dangerous people simply to keep food on the table. By the time Emilio was an adult, he had made a different choice. He wanted nothing to do with that world. He trained as an accountant, married a quiet, warm-hearted woman named Ilaria, and believed that his daughter, Celeste, would grow up far away from the danger that had shadowed his own childhood. But the past does not always let go so easily. Years before, Emilio's father had made an enemy of a powerful family known as the Rainieri organization, men who did not forgive debts or forget betrayals, even decades later. When the old man died without settling what he owed them, the Rainieri family decided his son would settle it instead, whether Emilio understood the debt or not. Rafael Leone had known Emilio since they were boys, growing up 2 streets apart in a neighborhood where everyone eventually chose a side. Rafael had gone one way, rising quickly and coldly through an organization of his own, while Emilio had tried desperately to walk away from all of it. Despite the different paths they had taken, an old loyalty remained between them, the kind formed in childhood that never fully disappears. When Emilio came to him, frightened and desperate, explaining that the Rainieri family had found him and was demanding a debt he could not possibly pay, Rafael made him a promise. "I'll handle it," Rafael told him. "You and your family will be safe. You have my word." It was a promise he intended to keep. But the Rainieri organization moved faster than either of them expected. One night, while Rafael was still arranging a way to resolve the debt quietly, men arrived at Emilio's home. Ilaria heard the commotion from the kitchen and immediately grabbed Celeste, barely 3 years old at the time, wrapping her in a blanket and slipping out through the back door while Emilio tried to stall the men at the front. Emilio did not survive that night. Ilaria ran with her daughter through the dark streets, calling the only number she had memorized in case something like this ever happened. Rafael's number. By the time he arrived, Emilio was already gone, and Ilaria had vanished into the city with Celeste, terrified and alone. Rafael spent the following weeks searching every corner of the city for them, calling in every favor he had, determined to keep the promise he had made to his childhood friend. The Rainieri family was searching too, unwilling to let a debt disappear simply because the man who owed it was dead. They believed, correctly, that Ilaria and Celeste were still worth pursuing, either as leverage or as a warning to anyone else who might think of running. It took nearly 3 weeks before Rafael finally found where Ilaria had been hiding, in a small apartment on the far side of the city, far from anyone who might recognize her. She opened the door with a kitchen knife gripped in one shaking hand, ready to defend her daughter against whoever had come for them. When she saw it was Rafael, she nearly collapsed with relief. "They're still looking," she told him, her voice hoarse from days of crying and barely sleeping. "I don't know how much longer I can keep her safe." "I'm going to get you both somewhere secure," Rafael promised her. "Tonight." Ilaria studied him for a long moment, her eyes red and exhausted, but steady. "Emilio trusted you completely," she said quietly. "He always said if anything ever happened, you were the only person he would trust with Celeste's life." "Nothing is going to happen to either of you," Rafael said. "I promise you that." But even as he said it, some quiet part of him understood how dangerous their situation truly was. The Rainieri family did not simply give up. They had already lost one target, and they would not easily accept losing the second. Ilaria seemed to understand this too, more clearly than he wanted to admit. That night, after Celeste had finally fallen asleep in her arms, she sat at the small kitchen table and did something Rafael did not learn about until much later. She picked up her phone, opened the camera, and began to record. She spoke quietly, careful not to wake her sleeping daughter, choosing her words the way a person chooses words they hope will matter for the rest of someone else's life. She was not making the recording because she believed she was about to die that very night. She simply understood, with a mother's instinct, that their situation had become too dangerous to leave anything to chance. When she finished, she saved the recording, slipped the phone into the bottom of Celeste's small backpack, tucked beneath a folded blanket, and said nothing to Rafael about what she had done. She had no way of knowing, in that quiet apartment, just how soon that small hidden phone would become the only thing left to explain the truth to her daughter. 3 days later, the Rainieri family found them again. Raphael had arranged to move Ilaria and Celeste to a safer location just outside the city, a quiet house owned by someone with no connection to his name. The plan was simple. His men would collect them early in the morning before the streets grew busy, and take them somewhere the Rainieri family had no reason to look. He never got the chance to carry out that plan. The Rainieri men found the apartment before dawn. Ilaria woke to the sound of the front door being forced open. She did not hesitate. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind every night since Emilio's death, imagining exactly what she would do if this exact nightmare arrived at her door. She scooped Celeste out of bed, wrapped her in the same blanket from weeks before, grabbed the small backpack sitting by the door, and slipped out through the narrow fire escape at the back of the building, moving as quietly and quickly as her shaking legs would allow. She managed to get 3 blocks before they caught up with her. Raphael had already been on his way, alerted the moment his contact in the building noticed unfamiliar men gathering outside. He drove faster than he had ever driven in his life, every second feeling impossibly slow, every red light an unbearable delay. He arrived just as the men cornered Ilaria in a narrow alley. What happened next would stay with him for the rest of his life, replaying in the quiet hours when sleep refused to come. Ilaria saw him arrive at the mouth of the alley. In the half-second she made the only choice a mother in her position could make. She shoved Celeste toward him, pushing the small backpack into his arms along with her daughter, and turned back to face the men closing in behind her, buying whatever seconds she could. "Take her," she said, her voice breaking. "Please. Take her and go. Ilaria. Go." Raphael had spent years in situations that demanded impossible choices, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of that moment. A frightened 3-year-old clung to his neck, crying and confused, while her mother stood between them and the men who had already taken everything else from her family. He made the only choice he could make. He turned and ran, carrying Celeste away from the alley as fast as his legs could move, gunfire echoing behind him in the dark. He did not look back. He could not look back, not with a child in his arms who needed him to keep moving, keep her safe, keep breathing steady enough that she would not sense the terror gripping his own chest. By the time reinforcements arrived and the alley fell silent, Ilaria was gone. Raphael carried Celeste to safety that night, her small hands fisted tightly in the fabric of his shirt, her cries eventually fading into exhausted silence as adrenaline gave way to shock. He did not sleep. He sat beside her in an unfamiliar house, watching her chest rise and fall, unable to process the full weight of what had happened in the space of a single hour. It was 2 days later, while sorting through the small backpack Ilaria had pressed into his hands, that he found the phone hidden beneath the folded blanket. He almost didn't open it. It felt like an intrusion into something that was no longer his to see. But something told him it mattered, and when he finally pressed play, he understood why Ilaria had made it. Her voice, calm and steady despite everything, filled the quiet room. She spoke directly to Celeste, though her daughter was far too young at the time to understand any of it. She explained, gently and carefully, that her real father had died trying to protect their family from men who wanted to hurt them. She explained that dangerous people were looking for them, and that if anything ever happened to her, there was one person she trusted completely to keep Celeste safe. She said his name clearly. She said just as clearly that he was not Celeste's father by blood, but that her daughter should never be afraid of him, because he had promised to protect her with everything he had, and Ilaria trusted that promise with her whole heart. Raphael sat in silence long after the recording ended, the small phone still in his trembling hands. He had failed to save Emilio. He had failed to save Ilaria. The only promise he had managed to keep was the smallest, most fragile piece of it all, a frightened little girl now sleeping in the next room, completely unaware of everything she had already lost. He saved the recording onto a private device and locked the phone away in his study, telling no one what it contained. In the months that followed, as Celeste slowly settled into her new life within the walls of his mansion, she began, without any prompting from him, calling him Daddy. She was too young to remember her biological father clearly, too young to fully understand what had happened the night her mother disappeared. To her small mind, Raphael was simply the man who had carried her to safety and never once let her go. The first few times he gently corrected her. But she had already lost one parent to violence and another to a tragedy she would spend her whole life trying to understand. He could not bring himself to take away the one steady thing she believed in, the one word that made her feel safe in a world that had already shown her how quickly safety could disappear. So he stopped correcting her. He was not pretending to be her father. He had simply become one in every way that mattered without ever intending to. And he carried the truth of that night, along with the guilt of everything he had failed to prevent, locked away as carefully as the small phone in his study, believing it was a burden meant for him alone to carry. He did not yet know that one day someone else would find it too. Weeks passed, and the distance between Aurora and Raphael did not shrink. If anything, it settled into something both of them had quietly accepted as permanent. Aurora told herself this was for the best. Raphael told himself he had done something wrong that she was not willing to name, though he could never quite work out what it was. It was a simple mistake that changed everything. Raphael had asked Aurora to retrieve a set of contracts from his private study, a room she had only entered a handful of times in 3 years, always briefly, always with a clear purpose. That afternoon he was in an urgent call with a supplier and needed the signed documents immediately. Aurora let herself into the study, moving quickly toward the desk where he usually kept important paperwork. The contracts were not on top of the desk. She opened the top drawer, searching carefully, and found a small stack of folders. Beneath them, tucked into the back corner of the drawer, sat an old phone, its screen cracked in one corner, clearly kept for reasons that had nothing to do with daily use. She should not have touched it. She knew that even as her fingers closed around it, some instinct telling her this was not hers to look at. But the phone was old enough, worn enough, that curiosity got the better of her before she could stop herself. She pressed the button on the side, and to her surprise it still turned on. There was only one video saved on the device. Aurora told herself she would just check what it was, just enough to understand why he had kept it hidden away so carefully. She pressed play. A woman's face filled the screen, tired but composed, sitting in a dimly lit kitchen. Aurora almost stopped the video immediately, assuming she had stumbled onto something private and unrelated. But something in the woman's voice made her keep watching. "Celeste, my love," the woman began, "if you're watching this, it means something happened to me and I wasn't able to explain everything myself." Aurora's hand tightened around the phone. The woman spoke slowly, carefully, explaining that Celeste's real father had died protecting their family from dangerous men who believed he owed them something he could never repay. She explained that she and her daughter had been running for weeks, hiding from the same people who had already taken so much from them. Then she said the words that made Aurora's breath catch in her throat. "There is a man who has promised to protect you if anything happens to me. His name is Raphael. He is not your father, Celeste, not by blood. But he loved your father like a brother, and he will keep his promise to protect you no matter what it costs him. Please don't be afraid of him. Trust him the way I trust him." Aurora sat down slowly on the edge of the desk, the phone still playing in her shaking hands. The woman continued, her voice softening even further, speaking directly to a daughter who would not understand any of it for years to come, hoping that whenever she finally did watch it, she would understand how much she had been loved and by how many people. The recording ended. Aurora sat in complete silence for a long moment, the weight of everything she had just learned settling slowly over her. Raphael was not Celeste's father. He had never been Celeste's father. He was a man who had made a promise to a dying friend and had spent years quietly keeping it, raising another man's daughter as his own, carrying the guilt of a night he could not fully prevent and telling no one. Every assumption Aurora had built over the past weeks collapsed at once. The distance she had created. The walls she had rebuilt around her own heart. The nights she had spent convincing herself that he already had a family that left no room for her. None of it had been based on the truth. It had been based on a single overheard word, misunderstood completely. She thought about every moment of unexplained tenderness she had witnessed in him over the years, moments she had never understood until now. The way his expression sometimes darkened when anyone mentioned families torn apart by violence. The quiet way he sometimes disappeared into the private wing of the house for hours, emerging with a look on his face that she had never known how to read. It all made sense now. All of it. Tears blurred her vision before she realized she was crying. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed by her own reaction, though there was no one in the room to see her. She carefully turned the phone off and placed it back exactly where she had found it, beneath the folders in the back corner of the drawer. She grabbed the contract she had originally come for, her hands still trembling slightly, and made her way back toward his office. She did not know yet what she would say to him. She only knew that she could not keep pretending nothing had changed, not after everything she had just learned. The man she had been quietly distancing herself from for weeks was not the man she had imagined him to be at all. He was something far more complicated, far more human, and far more deserving of the feelings she had spent so long trying to bury. When she reached his office door, she hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. Raphael looked up from his desk when Aurora entered, expecting her usual quick delivery and quicker exit. Instead, she stood in the doorway, the contracts held loosely in one hand, her eyes red-rimmed in a way he had never seen before. "Aurora?" He set down his pen immediately. "What's wrong?" She closed the door behind her, something she had not done in weeks, and for a moment she simply stood there, searching for the right words among everything crowding her mind. "I found the phone," she said finally. "In your desk. I wasn't looking for it, I was looking for the contracts and I saw it and She stopped, took a breath and started again. "I watched the recording." Raphael went very still. He did not need to ask which recording she meant. There was only one phone in that drawer, only one video that had ever mattered enough to keep hidden away for years. "I'm sorry," Aurora said quietly. "I know I shouldn't have touched it. But I did and now I know and I couldn't keep pretending I didn't." For a long moment Raphael said nothing at all. Aurora watched something shift across his face, a crack in the composure he wore like armor every single day of his life. She had seen him angry. She had seen him cold, calculating, unreadable. She had never once seen him look this exposed. "You know about Ilaria?" he said finally, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "I know she trusted you," Aurora said. "I know Celeste isn't your biological daughter. I know you've been carrying all of this alone." Raphael rose slowly from his chair and walked to the window, his back to her, his hands braced against the frame. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight Aurora had never heard from him before. "Emilio was my friend," he said. "We grew up 2 streets apart. He got out of this life, or he tried to. I promised him I'd handle his debt quietly. I promised him his family would be safe." He paused, his shoulders tightening. "I was too slow. He died before I could fix anything. Raphael. I found Ilaria 3 weeks later," he continued, as though he needed to say it all now that he had started, as though the words had been waiting years for permission to escape. "I promised her the same thing, that I would keep them safe. And I failed her too." He turned to face Aurora then, and for the first time in 3 years of working beside him, she saw tears standing in his eyes. "I got to the alley in time to save Celeste," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Only Celeste. Ilaria pushed her into my arms and told me to run, and I ran and I left her there, and I have never once forgiven myself for it." "You saved her daughter," Aurora said softly, stepping closer. "You kept the only promise you could keep." "It didn't feel like enough," he said. "It still doesn't." Aurora closed the remaining distance between them, something she never would have allowed herself to do weeks earlier. She reached out and took his hand and he did not pull away. "You raised her," Aurora said. "You gave her a home and safety and love. You let her call you daddy because taking that word away from her would have hurt her more than keeping the truth from her ever could. That isn't failure, Raphael. That's the opposite of failure." Raphael looked down at their joined hands, and something in his chest loosened slightly, some weight he had carried alone for years easing, just a little, under the simple pressure of her hand in his. "I thought you were pulling away from me because of something I did," he admitted quietly. "I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," Aurora said, her own voice unsteady now. "I saw you with Celeste weeks ago. I heard her call you daddy and I assumed you had a whole family I knew nothing about. I convinced myself I couldn't be part of that, so I pulled away before I let myself hope for something that wasn't mine to want." "And now?" Raphael asked, watching her carefully. "Now I know the truth," Aurora said. "And it doesn't change how I feel. If anything, it makes me admire you more than I already did." Raphael reached up and gently brushed a tear from her cheek, a gesture so careful it startled her. "I never meant to hide it from you specifically," he said. "I've never told anyone. Not because I don't trust you, but because it isn't only my story to tell. It's Celeste's too." "I understand," Aurora said. "And I'm honored that you trusted me with it now." They stood together in the quiet office for a long moment, the walls between them finally beginning to fall away. It was not a dramatic confession of love, not yet, but something had shifted permanently between them, something neither of them was willing to walk back from. "Would it be all right," Aurora asked softly, "if I got to know her? Properly, I mean. Not just as your assistant passing through the halls." Raphael's expression softened into something Aurora had never seen directed at her before. "She would like that," he said. "I think I would too." For the first time in weeks, Aurora left his office without the weight she had been carrying, and for the first time in years, Raphael felt a little less alone with the truth he had spent so long protecting by himself. In the weeks that followed, Aurora began spending time in the private wing of the mansion, the part of the house she had once avoided out of fear of what she might feel if she let herself get close. Now she visited often, sitting with Celeste while she stacked her wooden blocks or listened to her chatter about her day with the kind of endless energy only a 5-year-old could manage. Celeste took to her almost immediately. Children, Raphael had learned long ago, often understood warmth before adults gave themselves permission to trust it. Within a month, Celeste was asking for Aurora by name, tugging her toward the garden to show her a caterpillar she had found, or insisting she stay for dinner instead of leaving with the rest of the staff. Agata, who had cared for Celeste since she was small, watched the change with quiet approval. "That one has a good heart," she told Raphael one evening, nodding toward the garden where Aurora was chasing Celeste around the fountain, both of them laughing. "The house feels different with her in it." Raphael did not disagree. He found himself looking forward to the moments Aurora spent with them in a way he had not expected. It was not simply the comfort of watching Celeste happy, though that alone would have been enough. It was the quiet, steady way Aurora had settled into their lives, never forcing herself into a role that was not yet hers, simply showing up, again and again, with patience and warmth that asked for nothing in return. One evening, after Celeste had fallen asleep and Agata had retired for the night, Raphael found Aurora on the terrace, looking out over the garden in the soft evening light. "She asked me today if I was going to stay," Aurora said quietly without turning around. "I didn't know what to tell her." Raphael stepped up beside her. "What did you want to tell her?" Aurora finally turned to face him. "That I wanted to. More than I've wanted anything in a long time." "Then tell her that," Raphael said. "If it's true." "It's true," Aurora said. "But I need to know it's true for you too, not just for her." Raphael reached for her hand, the same way she had reached for his weeks earlier in his office, and held it gently. "I spent years believing I only had room in my life for one promise," he said. "To protect Celeste and nothing else. I never let myself imagine wanting something more because I was afraid of what it would cost me if I lost it." "And now?" Aurora asked, echoing the question he had once asked her. "Now I'm more afraid of losing you than I've ever been of wanting you," Raphael admitted. "I love you, Aurora. Not just for how good you've been to Celeste. For who you are when no one is asking you to be anything at all." Aurora felt her eyes fill with tears for the second time in his presence, though this time they were nothing like the tears she had cried the day she found the recording. "I love you too," she said. "I have for longer than I ever let myself admit." He kissed her then, gently, the kind of kiss that came after months of careful patience rather than sudden impulse, and Aurora felt every wall she had built over the years finally settle into something steadier, something she no longer needed to protect herself from. Their relationship grew slowly and honestly after that, built on the kind of trust that came from having already seen each other's hardest truths. Aurora did not simply become Raphael's partner. She became part of Celeste's life in a way that felt permanent, natural, unforced. 6 months later, Raphael sat Aurora down in his study, the same room where she had once found the phone that changed everything between them. "I want to adopt her," he said. "Legally. Officially. Not because I don't consider her mine already, but because I want her to have that security, in writing, in a way no one can ever question." "I think that's beautiful," Aurora said. "I want you to be part of it too," Raphael continued, his voice steady but careful. "If you'll have us. Both of us." Aurora understood immediately what he meant. Not simply as his partner, but as a mother to the little girl who had already claimed a piece of her heart months ago. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I want that more than anything." The adoption became official on a quiet afternoon in early spring, with only Cosimo and Agata present as witnesses. Celeste, now old enough to understand a little more than she had years earlier, did not fully grasp the legal weight of what was happening. She simply understood that the two people she loved most in the world were promising, in front of important papers, to always be her family. That evening, as the three of them sat together in the garden, Celeste climbed into Raphael's lap the way she had 100 times before, then reached out one small hand toward Aurora, pulling her closer until all three of them sat tangled together beneath the fading evening light. "Are we a real family now?" Celeste asked, looking between them with wide, hopeful eyes. "We always were," Raphael said softly. "Now it's official." Aurora wrapped her arm around them both, feeling, for the first time in years, that she had finally stopped protecting herself from something and started building it instead. Raphael Leone had once believed his only purpose was keeping a promise made to a dying friend. He had spent years quietly carrying the guilt of a night he could not fully change, believing the weight of it was his to bear alone. He had not expected in the end to find more than a promise kept. He had found a family whole and permanent, built not from the tragedy that started it, but from the love that had grown steadily in its place. And Aurora, who had once walked away from a sunlit room believing she could never be part of a life already so complicated, understood now that the very thing she had once feared had become the reason she finally chose to stay.